This presentation is sponsored by Cranial Release Technique.
The World Summit of Integrative Medicine 2015 presents Dr. William Doresti. William C. Doresti, DC, is CEO of Cranial Release Technique, Inc., a national training institute that he founded in 2005. The institute is dedicated to the advancement of the cranial release technique as a vital tool for healthcare practitioners worldwide in promoting wellness and reducing stress in patients and clients.
Welcome to this presentation on the cranial release technique. My name is Dr. William Doresti. I'm the CEO and the founder of the cranial release technique, which we'll probably call CRT, for the concept of the primary respiratory mechanism, this involuntary pumping mechanism of the cranium that all of us have from the time we're born until the time we leave this planet. It was Dr. Sutherland that said it's the system that comes first. It underlies all of life's processes and gives dynamism, form, and substance to all of anatomy and physiology. It's the spark that gives rise to the breath as it moves through the tissues. It's the foundation of metabolism, and it has both an inhalation and exhalation phase. Dr. Sutherland was absolutely convinced that the key to unlocking human physiology was through the head, and I have found that to be as well. So let's dig a little deeper. 2005, I come out with cranial release technique, and I found this slide in a British anatomy text. And virtually everywhere you look at the slide, you see distortion. You see osseous distortion, you see brain tissue distortion, and the caption underneath the slide said in the book, normal cranium. So you and I looking at this, we say, how could that be normal? It's distorted. But yet all we need to do is look at someone and we see one shoulder high, one hip rotated, one foot externally rotated, internally rotated. You and I are looking at distortion all day long. Now I want you to start thinking about cranial distortion. So I put these four words together, craniodural stress syndrome, to sort of explain what it is and the impact of a distorted cranium and what that would have on the rest of the body and the patient's health. So let's dig a little bit deeper. Okay, so Michael is our volunteer, and when we look at Michael, we'll take a look at him from a cranial release standpoint. And always we start from the head. As a matter of fact, I start from the eyes and work down. So let's take a look at Michael's eyes. When I look at Michael's eyes, it's pretty easy for me to see that his right eye is smaller and his right eye is lower. So right eye small, right eye low. When I look at the ears, you can just observe them, but what I like to do is I take my fingers and I actually just place them in the patient's ears, and then I look at that, and it's very noticeable when I do that, that Michael's right ear is inferior and also anterior. So inferior and anterior. When I look at Michael's maxillary arches, I come under the zygomatic arches here. Again, his right arch is lower. And again, in cranial work, and certainly in cranial release technique, we're looking for the smaller, lower, tighter side. That's the more symptomatic side of the body. So we've looked at the cranium, and you say, well, so what? Well, the so what is, if I take my plastic model here, the so what is, what we just did was we looked at Michael's facial bones. We looked at the one eye small, the one eye low, the one ear inferior, the one ear anterior, the maxillary arch inferior. We looked at all that, and that's now going to translate into a global cranial issue. And that global cranial lesion ends up here at our friend the blue bone, the occipital bone. And at the base of the occipital bone, we have our two friends here, the occipital condyles. And so as the cranium shifts and rocks, so goes the occipital bone, so go the condyles, and therefore so goes the atlas. So being a chiropractor, Michael comes into my office complaining of whatever, and I then palpate his atlas, and it's very noticeable that Michael's atlas has shifted to the left. And from there, Michael, if I could just turn you around maybe, and just face the back. If we look at Michael's shoulders, what you'll see is his right shoulder is elevated. Michael, if you could just put your hands out to the side. His right hip is also elevated. And what I want you to understand here is that from this cranial distortion that Michael is presenting with, you can put the hands down now, Mike, that's then leading to an osseous craniosacral distortion. And we're going to change everything by addressing the cranium. Well, as we just saw with Michael, here's a real skull, and again, everywhere you look at this skull is distortion. You can see here, one eye is lower, the ears are distorted, the external auditory meatuses are distorted. There's distortion everywhere in the cranium. There's distortion at the condyles as well. And if you look inside the cranium, and as my slide shows from Gray's Anatomy, obviously we're protecting the central nervous system, and every one of these little foramen, if you remember back from school, all the cranial nerves pass through, the spinal cord passes through. This is essentially what makes you, you, and me, me. And again, because of this osseous distortion, that's going to negatively impact the physiological function of the central nervous system. The Florida Institute of Mental Health, unrelieved stress contributes to family breakdown, chronic health problems like heart disease, high blood pressure, memory loss, depression, even on-the-job accidents and injuries. Well, I'm going to shift gears again with you because we spoke about, the anatomy and the physiology. What about energetics? What about energy medicine of today? You've heard of Barbara Brennan, you've heard of Bruce Lipton, you've all heard of acupuncture, you've all heard of Reiki. Well, cranial release changes the energetics in the body, as reported to me by people, masters in all those different fields. As a matter of fact, we were just at a convention, and I had one of my students that went and took an aura picture, and the aura had its colors. He then came to me, received a cranial release, and I asked him to go back and have another picture done. And when he had the pre and post, the post picture was completely different. All the colors were brighter, stronger, and actually the person who took the aura picture couldn't believe it. The final piece of the puzzle, well, we went through the craniodural stress syndrome. That's the slides we've been going through. Now it's time to apply the global anatomical release. It's time to actually put my hands on Mike's head to change structure, to change function. Remember, at the end of the day, structure determines function. If a patient's structure is distorted, there's no way the physiology will be optimized in the body. And so what we'll be doing is, by changing cranial structure, we'll be changing the reciprocal tension membrane system. You remember, that's the dura mater, the tension in the dura. That will stabilize the spine, release the extremities, release the fascia, rebalance the neurological system, both the peripheral, cranial, and autonomic nervous system. And again, at the end of the day, all of our patients, all the people in your community are looking for improved health and well-being. This is probably the most important poster chart that I use with patients, Mike. And ideally, I'd like you to be in the middle. When you're in the middle, the brain is balanced. When the brain is balanced, the muscles are balanced. When the muscles are balanced, the structure, the bones are balanced. That's the way you're supposed to go through life. Okay? When you're in the middle, remember before we spoke about your body is healing, repairing, and regenerating itself. Your body is constantly rebuilding itself from inside out. Unfortunately, when we're under constant, chronic, low-level stress, as we all are, physical stresses, chemical stresses, emotional stresses, even EMF stresses, the stresses from cell phone, the energy from computers. We're in a Wi-Fi environment here. One of the brain hemispheres becomes overactive. You're figure number one. Your left brain is overactive because of stress. And the reason why I know it's the left is that the left brain controls the right body. It's as if the wires cross over. So left brain controls right body, and what happens there, you can see the distorted picture of posture that happens. Also now your nervous system is now stuck in survive, protect, defend. It's as if you're constantly under threat and your body can't heal properly, your body can't rebuild itself properly, and that's all going to change starting today with cranial release.